and welcome to the third series of the Marathon Medic podcast. My name's Amy and I'm a junior doctor and running coach with an interest in sports medicine. On this series of the podcast, we'll be talking about everything running and travel related. On this episode, I'm chatting with Mark Callaghan. Mark is an endurance athlete and coach who has a passion for running, travel and social change. Mark has set up projects including Sport for Africa, which aims to support community sports projects through sustainable funding, and Run Kapchorwa, which promotes Kapchorwa as a leading destination for sport tourism in East Africa. As well as this, Mark documents his experiences on his blog, Adventures in Running. So hi Mark, and thank you so much for joining me. Could you just start us off by chatting a little bit about yourself and your journey into running?
Okay, so the journey into running is kind of second time around, I guess. I ran at secondary school. I ran cross country and track. I started doing cross country because I didn't want to play rugby. I was a very slight child, and the idea of playing rugby with other boys who had already gone through puberty. I didn't go through puberty till I was about 30, so I was absolutely tiny, and the idea of playing rugby did not appeal to me at all. So the other option was cross country. So I chose cross country, and luckily for me, it turned out that I was quite handy at it. So that was my first introduction to running, I suppose, running cross country and running track at secondary school. But football was always my first love. So I didn't really, after I left school, I kind of dropped running and just concentrated on football. And it wasn't really until I got into my sort of mid to late 30s, I guess, that I finished with football, but then found this kind of void in terms of not really having a sport to do, and missing competition and missing some sort of structure around training, and also the social side. Really miss the social side as well. So I think the first and foremost, missing that, having that outlet, having that sporting outlet was the reason that I got back into running, and a little bit of curiosity to see, if however many years on I could still shift. So. And then marathon, I think, was the first thing that appealed to me, that I'd not done a marathon before, and just to see how it would go. So with no concept of how difficult it is to prepare for a marathon, typical kind of newbie to coming from competitive sport, coming from a sport like football where it's quite easy, the harder you try normally, the better the result. And just coming to a marathon and just thinking, I'm pretty, I played football, it'll be fine. And just having a horrendous day at London. London Marathon was my first marathon, having a horrendous day there. And I didn't go anywhere near the marathon again till 4 or 5 years later. And it was the same, it was just, I think it takes you a couple of marathons. If you're one of those people who aren't that serious about your running, and you just kind of rely on your competitive mindset and the fact that you're fairly confident you'll get round, but what that doesn't take into account is how difficult you're going to make it for yourself by not doing any preparation. And definitely the first couple were grim, to say the least. But then I think it really piqued I wonder how it would feel and how you could do if you actually looked into how to prepare properly. And I think that was the first time I heard the phrase about respecting the distance, and being quite a big fan of that whole, the whole David Brailsford marginal gains idea. And, so that was at the same kind of time, I think I was starting to take an interest in like sports psychology and sports science. And not that I had any background in that at all, but just that I found it really fascinating. I think if you're someone who's been winging something and has found it to be a lot more challenging than you expected, but you're also quite inquisitive, I think the idea that you could look into all these different areas and maybe bring your level up really, really appealed to me. It became like a nice little side project to say, okay, what kind of things do you need to do to get to feeling good in a marathon? Is that even a thing? Can you feel good in a marathon? That's kind of one of those questions. And what do you need to eat? How do you need to train? Who can you talk to who knows how to do it well? Who can you watch? Who can you kind of use as an example of what good looks like in marathon? And I think, like, as well, because I'd not been involved in club running, moving into running to me was always, it's a solo endeavour, and then being introduced to team running, cross country, for example, is a really good example of, as an adult, the involvement in a running club cross country. I found that really, really cool. Like running with your teammates at a cross country meet was firstly like throwing it back to being like 11 years old again in the freezing, icy cold in a UK winter, but this time running with your mates from the running club. I found that really helpful, and learning from those guys who had years and years of running experience that I didn't have. I think that was really helpful in my journey to trying to understand, how can I be a better runner, how can I be a better marathon runner.
And through learning all of those things, have you answered your own question about whether you can actually run a marathon and feel good?
I think so. I don't know whether I just imagined it or I look back now and think that was it, that was the moment. But there was a race and a moment where I thought, this is it. Like, this is what it feels like to feel confident and comfortable and, light, and all of the things that I thought there's no way that you can ever feel this in a marathon. It's just so grim. But yeah, there was that moment. And, sometimes you look back on things and maybe you've made it a slightly kind of glossier than it actually was. But yeah, I think Brighton 2015, that was the first time that I ran under 3 hours. And again, that's another thing. Like I was always like, that's just not possible. You must have to be super special, or like super dedicated, or like one of those kind of real, I don't know what you call them. I call them like runner types, because I don't see myself as a runner type. Like just like people who just live
for running.
Everything is running, and they're like, and I've never been like that. So I thought, you must have to be one of those people. But it turned out you didn't.
And since then, have you had that feeling with all the races you've done, or do you feel like it is just race to race? How are you prepared?
Oh God, yeah, real mixed bag. I mean, it wasn't like, this is the beginning of a whole new
your career.
Yeah, incredible feeling during the marathon. No, definitely not. I've had that sensation and that feeling again, for sure, in other races when I've been going along nicely. But I think I've probably had more difficult experiences in the marathon in particular, but in other races as well. If you respect the distance and you prepare well, it is possible to actually feel like you're getting the better of the marathon. Race, yeah. But yeah, for sure, to answer your question,
there's been some difficult times since then.
Yeah, they're all like flooding back to me at once. But yeah, there's definitely been some the complete opposite of that as well.
And now your life is, I'd say, almost kind of dedicated to running in terms of your job and what you do day to day. Can you tell me a little bit about the transition from a corporate career to running?
I think the travel side of it probably came before the running side of it. So I mean, I'd always tried to have like long breaks from my sort of mid-20s. I tried to have long breaks where I wasn't in like career mode. And I know it's not the same for everyone, but for me, I've never understood like just being in career mode for 30 years. And that's the main thing. Like that didn't resonate with me like it might other people. So I'd always try to sort of like grow my career, but at the same time allow myself breaks where I could go and explore. Because I wasn't really like the holiday type. I was more, I want to kind of
immerse yourself.
I want to. If I'm going to go somewhere, I want to make a good run at it and learn a bit more about where I am and the culture and all that, and at least try to have a go at the language, even though I'm not particularly brilliant at languages. I try. So it was always like trying to have a good run. If I was going to go to a region or whatever, have a good run at it. I'd always said like when I hit 30, I'd take a long break, and so when I hit 30, I did this idea I'd had that I would just stop whatever I was doing at that time and then just go and make a list of 30 countries and then just go and do them all, go and visit them all in one go, and however long it took is however long it took. And I think that was the trip that made like really kind of sowed the seed. Of course, everyone would be like, I'd like to travel all the time. Who wouldn't? Like, if you like travel, then why wouldn't you want to do it all the time? But that's just not. It's not the way life works, unfortunately. If only it did. If you're not the type of person that is in that structure where you have a career, and you have a career because either you love that career or you have a career because you're looking after your family or that's the kind of route you're on. But if you're not on that route, then you can often feel like, I don't know if I fit into that route, or I don't fit into that route. So maybe there are some alternatives available to you. I was already starting to think, how could you like forge an existence that is a better fit for where you are? So I think that's where it started. And it just so happened that I was starting to get into running at the same time that I was trying to think, how could I have a way of living that means that I'm spending more time exploring other countries and cultures. I'd continued working in the kind of corporate environment, but I was also starting to go through my coaching licenses for athletics. So there was the travel bit. I was working on the coaching. I was really getting into sort of endurance sport and running in particular. But I was also, as I moved through my coaching, really starting to take an interest in sport for social change, sport for community development, and the idea that everyone should have access to sport. The people that needed sport the most couldn't do it, and the people that perhaps needed it the least. And I mean, obviously, for me, everyone needs sport, but perhaps the word intervention is probably the best word to use. Like, didn't really need the intervention, had all of the access. So I think slowly you can just start to see all these different routes slowly coming together into one. And the idea of Sport for Africa was that what skills and industries are already strong and already working in these countries, that if you link up with a sports organisation and link up with someone with those skills who is already doing something in that industry, can you work together as a partnership and create funding for sport? So we started doing that at the end of 2019. I'm laughing because I know what's coming. And we looked at, farming and farmers and tailoring and the typical kind of industries that are every day in Ugandan communities, especially rural communities where, the sport provision is so weak. So we started working with a couple of organisations around tailoring and farming, try and prove that you can generate income and then fund sport off the back of them. And then about 4 weeks before the first farming harvest, obviously COVID hit.
Yeah. And
the whole of Uganda was locked down, and you weren't allowed to move. So we had this big crop of sweet potatoes outside a secondary school in Mpigi, which is like a little while outside of Kampala, and it was just sat there. And it was due for harvest. No one could move. You weren't even allowed to. Public transportation was shut down. You weren't allowed to use a private vehicle. So it just sat there for like 2 months. And like 60% of the crop had gone because of weather and rodents, etc., etc.
So was the concept is that you're trying to create projects and business about what's already there, and then use the funding from that to basically encourage people into sport and provide run coaching? Is that how it was kind of set up to work? No,
I think it's not necessarily running specific. Okay. I think a lot of African countries, and Uganda is no different. Football is king.
Okay.
So most of the sports programs, football is always the first on the list. So football, netball, and then athletics. They're kind of like the three main sports there. Maybe rugby as well. Rugby definitely features. Yeah, that's the whole idea. But I mean, with a lot of things, COVID was a big old stride backwards. But the hope is, as things start to normalise and it's a bit easier to operate and move around, that we can reintroduce the momentum. But it's going to take some time.
When you have spent time there, you've obviously been there for a little while now. What have you taken away in terms of the running culture and how it differs from the UK, and has that impacted your running?
I love comparing the two because they're so different. And it's another one of those things where travel really kind of broadens your mind in so many ways, because especially if you've not moved beyond a certain existence or a certain society, because there are so many things to experience and learn, and some of them are so different to what you've always known, that you're just like, wow, I had no idea you could do it this way. This way is much better. So yeah, with running, it's really interesting. I think the first thing was that because everyone thinks of Kenya and Ethiopia, when they think of running in East Africa, they always think of Kenya and Ethiopia. Ever since I'd become interested in running, I'd always had an interest in in competitive athletics as well. And it was always the East African athletes had some magic in them, and that was very much Kenya and Ethiopia. And I was traveling around Uganda, and I was down in near the border with Rwanda, in the lakes near where the gorillas are. And I was talking to someone, and they were telling me about this place in Uganda, because I was sort of like, there's Ugandan endurance runners as well, right? But there's not really a running culture in Uganda as such. Like, I mean, a little bit in Kampala, but when you go out to the villages and the rural areas, like, it's still very strange to see someone running. It's still like, in terms of social running, running for well-being, running to feel good, running for mindfulness, all that kind of stuff. There's nothing. Like, you just don't see it. I was sort of like, where do people in Uganda actually run? And this guy's like, oh yeah, there's this little village up in the mountains, and all of the best Ugandan runners come from there. And I'd never heard of it, because obviously I'd heard of like Sululta in Ethiopia, where the like Mo Farah trains, and where the Ethiopian runners train, and Iten and Eldoret and all that kind of stuff. I knew all about in those places, and I'd been to Iten and Eldoret, and I'd seen this kind of this idea of almost like a centre of excellence, but just like a natural centre of excellence. Not that it had been built, that
just happened to be where all the runners are concentrated.
Exactly. And so I heard about this place, and I was kind of like, that sounds bloody amazing. So this place, it's in the middle of bloody nowhere. Like, it's like on the side of an extinct volcano. Mount Elgon is the name of the mountain. And yeah, it's this little farming village on the side of an extinct volcano, right over in the east of Uganda. So it's like 7 or 8 hours drive from Kampala, or probably an extra hour from Entebbe, where the only airport, international airport. And I was like, I've got to go here. I'd found out that Stephen Kiprotich, the guy who won the Olympic marathon in London in 2012, was from Kapchorwa. This place, Kapchorwa, is the name of it. Joshua Cheptegei was also from Kapchorwa. And when I arrived there, they were kind of, everyone was talking about this guy. You climb up to this place, and even when you're climbing up, you just start to spot people out running, and you don't see that anywhere else in Uganda. And then when you get there, if you didn't know, you would not think, like, there's no real signs, like there's no stadium or anything. It just looks like this mountain side farming town. There's nothing special about it in terms of that. But then when you kind of move out of the town and you see these, like, the trails and the hills, you can see why people who live and train there, how they're just a different level. It's so hard. Like, the terrain is so tough, and the runners are just everywhere. Groups of like 15, 20, 25 every morning, like first light, and every evening, like 4:30, 5 o'clock. They're just everywhere.
Have you got to the bottom about, like, why in certain areas of Uganda you're not seeing anyone running around, and then in this pocket everyone's on their feet morning and night?
It's definitely down to the lack of a kind of a social running scene in Uganda. Like, all of the people in Kapchorwa, that's why it's so weird. Like, all of the people in Kapchorwa are running because they're running for livelihood. They're running to earn prize money or sponsorship, so that they can feed their families. You're talking about 18, 19-year-old kids who are just coming out of school, who are hoping that they're going to be the next Joshua Cheptegei, to obviously Joshua Cheptegei himself, who is, the biggest role model, as you can imagine. World champion, 5K world record holder just the other week. So he's just like, he's everything that everyone there aspires to be. But that's the difference. I think everyone there is very serious. When I run, I just get laughed at most of the time, because they just wonder why am I running if I'm not making a living from it?
It seems like such a stark contrast to here, where I think most people are running for the social and have no interest in times and
yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, it's really, really different. And to go back to the first part of the question, I suppose it's running like stripped back to its most basic kind of level, and seeing people excel without all of the trappings and all of the noise and all of the add-ons and all of the gimmicks does make you question whether you need all or any of the things that, you know, there's no glossy running magazines in Uganda saying, hey, look, here's all the stuff you need to buy. It's just if you're lucky, you will get a decent pair of running shoes provided to you by your camp or maybe by a sponsor. Those who don't, they just kind of hand them down. I mean, there's that really nice sense of community there where those that have share with everybody else. So even the runners who are doing well for themselves, you know, and get whatever, a whole bunch of shoes from their sponsors, will just pass them. And it's funny because you can see where people have shared kit because they've got like official race bags and tracksuits and stuff from countries they've never even been to, but someone who's traveling and you know, earning some money on the circuit is just sharing kit out across the teams and stuff. So the simplicity of it is one of the intriguing things, I think, the fact that you see what can be achieved just with the absolute minimum of kit and nutrition and all that kind of stuff. And you just think, well, I don't necessarily feel like I need to have all of this. I mean, I get how the model works and why people are trying to sell you a whole bunch of stuff. I get it. But yeah, I think
it adds to the barriers here as well, doesn't it? Like those people that don't have the access, they're probably not going to feel too comfortable turning up to a running club where everyone's in the latest kit.
I think you're absolutely right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. It's very
interesting.
Simple.
Yeah, it definitely makes me question where where some of my money goes. That's for sure. Just in terms of your own personal running, where's been your favourite place to run in all your travels?
I think just for everyday running, I'm super biased. I'd have to say Kapchorwa, and there's just, because it's so high up. Yeah. Like it's got this really nice. If you go at the right time of the day, it's like beautifully cool. If you've ever been to Uganda, particularly if you've been to Kampala, and you think how oppressive the heat and the traffic and the noise and the dust is, and all of a sudden you're in this place where it's like cool, crisp morning air. You're on the side of a mountain, but you've still got that really lovely deep red kind of dirt to run on. And it's really quiet because it's so far out of the way. There's not much in terms of traffic and stuff. So you can like hear your own footsteps crunching the kind of red dirt. And there's just, because you're so high up, you can just see the plateau and the plains like miles for miles and miles.
I always feel like I shouldn't be asking these questions when travel is pretty much a no-go at the moment. It's making me a bit jealous. And in terms of races, what are the best races that you've done outside of the UK?
Oh God. Well, I think all of the marathon majors that I did were special. Just the noise, especially in the American ones, the noise and the support of the crowds. And I think I wrote about it on one of them. Like, I think it's the closest you'll ever come as like a kind of like a jobbing middle of the road runner to experiencing what it feels like to be like in amongst a crowd who are just really like lifting you up. Yeah. And I think the marathon majors, as much as they're, you know, there's the whole bit that they're becoming more and more kind of corporate and stuff, and I get that. But in terms of like the feeling you get, like turning a corner and hitting a particular street or going over a particular bridge, and there are thousands and thousands and they're just going absolutely, they don't care, you know, they don't care who you are, where you're from, how rubbish you are. For that moment, you feel like a superhero, and it's just amazing.
And for people that are looking to combine their running with travelling around, what would your kind of tips and advice be for people planning big adventures in different countries, hopefully on foot?
I can definitely recommend the experience of going somewhere for a longer stretch and kind of getting involved in whatever the, you know, the country or that particular area has to offer. Getting to know a few people beforehand, making it a bit more of a kind of locals experience. I've definitely got an awful lot out of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. Is there anything else you just want to add to end with?
Probably the only other thing is that I forgot to mention was that one of the projects that we do in Kapchorwa is a project to try and increase the amount of people who are visiting that region. So the idea is to try and promote Kapchorwa as a destination for people to come run, whether that be running for leisure, but also for training, because it's at altitude. It's at 2,000 meters altitude, so it's also a nice different kind of place to go for altitude training. Yeah, so that project is called Run Kapchorwa. So I think you can probably find out more about that afterwards. But yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning if you're interested in visiting the land of Ugandan champions and maybe coming and doing some running in my other backyard. Then yeah, we'd love to have you.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to hear more from Mark, then you can head to his website adventuresinrunning.info, where you'll find Mark's blog and also further information about Sport for Africa and Run Kapchorwa. You can find Mark on Instagram using @markc_run, and you can follow me using the handle @marathonmedic. I'll be back with another travel-related podcast next week. Thanks for listening.